Thank you for listening to Faith Over Breakfast. This is Bryan Betz, your host, and I'm with Pastor Andy Littleton, who's always late, Pastor Eric Deepen, who's always way too early for me to buy him breakfast, and me, the host, who's either too early or too late, but never on time. We are at XO Coffee having a delicious breakfast. Well, actually, both Pastor Eric and Andy have finished their meals, and I am not even halfway done.
Which is fine. You're the host. You can eat.
I'll provide the background noise.
Yeah,
I think it's necessary.
The background crunches that show that this is authentic.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hey, my name's Andy Littleton, pastor at Mission Church in Tucson, Arizona, and I just had a Whiskeytown biscuit thanks to XO Coffee. I don't believe whiskey was involved, but I'm sure it would have been delicious if it were. And
next time.
Yeah, it was great. And so we just want to thank XO for letting us stay here. Here in Tucson, Arizona, this is one of the premier coffee spots, and we're just thrilled to get to sit up in the loft and record. Eric, you just got back from vacation. Who are you and how are you?
Well, I'm Pastor Eric, and I'm from the village. And yes, I did get back from vacation. We were up in Denver, and then we were in Edwards, basically, or Eagle, for a while. And, you know, the high was 80 instead of 115.
Yeah.
That's really all that matters about vacation at this point in the summer, is just trying to be out of the heat and hanging out with the family and trying really hard not to think about my church and what's going on there and how hot they all are and all that kind of stuff.
But you guys have air conditioning now.
We have air conditioning in our main sanctuary, but we don't have air conditioning in the rest of the building. Mm-hmm. So they were running little small machines and the swamp coolers that are portable. Yeah, it was bad. I heard really bad.
Oh, shit.
Luckily, nobody comes to church in the summer because they're all on vacation, at least at our church. So it was okay. It was a smaller evening, so it wasn't too hot that way. But yeah, they were blowing breakers because they had so many, air conditioners plugged in.
Perfect. Good. Yeah.
But yeah, they're working on air conditioning. We have 2 huge units sitting on the roof, and they've been ripping out electrical stuff.
Okay, so air conditioners are on the premises.
Yeah,
That's good.
You can imagine how cool it will be.
Yeah, wow, that's exciting. Yeah, we at Mission Church are an authentic Tucson church, meaning we have only swamp cooling for the summer.
That's right. Yeah. Oh my gosh, at 115 in that brick room.
Yeah, and we had one of our biggest Sundays ever last week, which was out of nowhere in the middle of the summer. And it was so hot, and what happens when you jam a hot building full of humans is it just gets hotter, and so it was kind of like, I don't know, people smelled and it was great, but no, it was a nice week, but wow, a thought went through my mind, like, just God, thanks for creating the minds that created air conditioning, and could we please have some someday?
Yeah, we have swamp cooling for, we still have it in sections, but every Sunday I would have that as part of my prayer. God, thank you for swamp cooling.
Yeah.
Thank you for it being really hot.
Yeah. Yeah. But hey, it's, sometimes we've had our swamps out before in the past, and that's really bad. So there are degrees. Swamp cooling it's somewhat cool air wafting around. That's better than not cool air. Yeah. But these are all reasons people could leave our churches, right? Which amazingly, incredibly, leads into the very topic we were going to discuss today. Brian, you were wondering how to transition. I just did it for you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So
I have one job, and you did it for me. I appreciate it. I'll just go ahead and leave now. But
everybody's leaving. There's a theme here. Do you notice a theme?
Yeah. Pastor Eric, you actually were reading an article about that, too. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. I was reading an article from Brian McLaren, who, is a little controversial of a person if you know who he is. But he wrote an article, at least the first part now, about clergy and priests and pastors leaving the church at maybe the same rate or just in a similar way that millennials are supposedly leaving the church over frustration with just maybe the inactivity or the inability of the church to do anything that's meaningful in the world, or the priests and pastors feel like they're having a genuine impact on the world for good.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's, I mean, I guess if you're in the church, if you're a church person, you're aware that people leave the church. I mean, you people are here, people are gone. Sometimes people leave and they're going off to other churches, or they're saying, I just don't want to be a part of this, or they come for a little while and they hope they're going to try it. But then I would assume if you're not in church, you're probably at least aware of the fact that there are numbers and articles coming. I mean, I read something recently, I feel like New York Times, where they were talking about decreased church attendance, but then there are other articles coming out saying right in the midst of this, decreased church attendance, there's a heightened religious awareness, and people are starting to think about and talk about religion more.
Right.
So going to church less, talking about religion more. We observe people leaving churches, and you're saying, including the clergy.
Right.
And millennials are notorious in our, current situation for being people who can't settle down. But he's saying, Brian McLaren's saying, it's not just them, it's the pastors do the same thing. And so here we are, pastors, and Brian's a millennial, so this is perfect.
Yeah. So why are you leaving the church, Brian?
You almost left the podcast.
I know.
Didn't work out for you, and you just left.
I know. I just didn't want to distract everybody by getting up and leaving, so I'm just going to do it. This will be my last podcast. No.
Yeah. Moving on to another podcast.
Exactly. But just to take the attention off of me, we were discussing earlier about this. You mentioned that you had some of your staff leave the church as well, and you've been leading this church for a long time. Have there been good reasons and bad reasons?
Yeah. Well, first to clarify, it feels a little funny for you to tell me staff. we're a tiny little church. But
That is true.
Yeah.
For a period of time, we had some interns and a pastor who actually raised his own money. And so he was on staff, and a really good friend of mine, and he left. And that, just even leaving in a community that's smaller, everybody is friends, everybody's connected. You've had some meaningful experience. It's not just this person up front who's talking to you on Sunday, and maybe you see his kids running around, like you babysat his kids, or you were over at his house for dinner, or you were, over in her Bible study, and so then all of a sudden, like they're leaving, and you don't understand why, because you were all on the same mission together, and now they're on a new mission. It doesn't make any sense, because a lot of times I feel like people leave suddenly or unexpectedly.
Yeah.
They don't like when we leave, we don't always bring in people into the conversation. So even like when I was early on staff at a church, the head pastor literally 2 weeks into me joining just left. Didn't tell anybody why he was leaving. He just said, I'm done with ministry. I'm leaving ministry, not just I'm going to another church.
Yeah,
So,
and a big part of my journey was I got plugged into this smaller church when I was younger, and I had great reasons for going. They had a great mission statement. They were solid in the gospel, and there happened to be a girl I liked at the church.
right.
That might have been primary reason for going. It's really hard to tell, but I went to this church, and there was an older pastor who'd been there a long time, and he was beloved. I mean, I still talk to people from there, and they remember him. He cared about them. But he wasn't above picking the weeds and organizing the closet and whatever. He had been there forever, and then and then he retired, and then a new pastor came and left, and then a church plant was started that eventually didn't last, and just the journey that community went on, and I was there for part of that. It changed. I mean, the whole face of that church changed because a pastor left. And of course, people are going to retire. That's you have to. But yeah, it's a kind of a traumatic thing when something like that occurs. And then, like what you're talking about, having kind of a helper secondary, maybe not quite as traumatic, but still, there are people who connect with them,
Right.
and really enjoy that. And to have somebody like that leave changes everything and can affect people and how they feel. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, yeah. So how do you feel about pastors leaving? I kind of threw something out before the podcast that I've known a pastor that's been in a large number of very different churches, and there seems to always be good reasons because the people are difficult and there's issues and the budget and there's a long list of things that are wrong in organizations. But Bryan, millennial, how do you feel about that?
Well, I've kind of witnessed when I was a kid, I went to a church that was very much like Pastor Eric Siepen's church, where they used words like clergy and stuff like that. So I have that's a term that I'm familiar with. But then, preteen years, we started going to a much larger church where I never once heard the word clergy, and then it was staff. So there's all those distinctions too.
My rod and my staff should comfort me. Exactly. That's what it's from.
No, I'm kidding. But I've seen people. I visited other churches that people from my school had invited me to kind of create some sort of community. It was okay, we go to different churches, but it doesn't mean we're enemies or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
And it was a great church, but there was this one pastor who said that this isn't your grandpa's church.
Right.
It was one of those things where maybe dynamics like that and people like that push away people who have been doing ministry a long time. And some things might be traditional, some things might be outdated, but still have value. They don't have the value that they used to. We might have talked about this recently, where there are programs that still mean a lot to people, and they were severely impacted from these ministries. But now, the way that the culture is, it's not having the same impact that it did.
Right.
So we're having people who have been in ministry a long time feeling like their time has run out. There are new people coming in church that have a genuine desire to make an impact in their communities through ministry, and they're being pushed out because their voices are being heard, because they're viewed as young and oh, you don't understand, you don't get it, you're too young. So I've seen people who are young and full of ambition and who actually have a lot of great things to say get pushed out because just because they're young, their voices aren't being heard. And I've seen older pastors who still have a lot of life in them, and they deserve. They've given so much ministry and still have so much to give, but because they're old or outdated or whatever people might say they are, they're being pushed out as well, by themselves or their communities itself. So I've seen both. Those are really prominent reasons I've seen.
Yeah, I can't help but think so just yesterday I was with a pastor who was meeting up with some other pastors for the afternoon, and I guess one of them is being, he's not a pastor, he's just attending a church, and his pastor is about to leave, and kind of came to him and said, would you just be the pastor of this church? And this is a guy who doesn't have any form of training, I'm not huge on all the training. Eric and I both are undertrained in many people's opinion, but he hasn't been mentored, discipled to be a pastor or anything, and the pastor's just going, I'm going to leave, you should do it, from what I could gather. And that happens more than we think, which is pretty wild.
Yeah, that's how I ended up in this process.
There you go. Yeah, and that sort of stuff happens. So it's funny to think it's just so important for a pastor to be a leader of people and to be walking with God and in some of these things, and even to have some plans. And I know God salvages so many situations by instilling those things in somebody who wasn't ready or whatever. But I wonder how many times that sort of stuff goofs up. I mean, just makes things hard when things are done really sloppily and without care and prayer, and then I got to hear Mark Dever speak the other day, so I'm bringing him up just to counterbalance Brian McLaren. So since we brought up Brian McLaren, we're going to bring up...
Should we go ahead and say things like N.T. Wright?
That's kind of right in the middle.
Yeah.
So now we've kind of everybody out there.
Good. Now we think.
So we've name dropped a conservative, a moderate, and a liberal.
Right.
Good.
We're good to go.
There we go.
Perfect.
But it's something Mark Dever, if you've heard of him, he's a pastor in Washington D.C. But he's been in his church a long time, and he is just well known for building up young leaders, like tons of them. And right now he's big on young African American scholars and African American pastors, and I think various nationalities. But he sees a big void there. But he brought with him a number of young guys that he's training up, and there's a long list of pastors who were trained up under him. So here's a guy who's been really consistent, but he's building and sending out more leaders. And you see that, and you go, wow, that takes a lot of work and thought and preparation. And you just wish you saw more of that, like pastors being developed that way, than just being said, hey, can you do this? Nobody else wants to, stuff like that. And I wonder how much that would impact.
Well, we should say we're Faith Over Breakfast. I'm Pastor Eric. That was Pastor Andy, and we got Bryan Betz as the host.
Token millennial,
and that's why he's here. We call him the host, but he's really just our token millennial.
Yeah, that's true. And by the way, I find a lot of value in the term clergy. I don't think that's outdated or anything. I think I'd rather say clergy than staff, for sure. It's just now I've always, it was a kid as a clergy. Now it's just always been staff.
But millennials are all yearning for the vintage expression of faith, so that makes total sense.
That's exactly right. That's exactly it.
Yeah,
but whatever.
You like the clergy to lead you through the liturgy and speak the benediction over you.
Exactly. I have a book on common prayer, and it's a book on liturgy by Shane Claiborne and a couple other people. I've read it. I got it in high school, I think it was. And I've not touched the book since because I have too many books, and I'm also lazy, to be more honest. But I was curious, what sort of things have you seen? I mean, not your church, but other churches that you've seen people are leaving, clergy and staff alike.
Oh, the list is probably very, very long. It seems like with clergy, it tends to be, when you say like, they either come in with high ideals of what they are going to be able to do, and then that is frustrated to some, either because the structure of the church or the people aren't on board or something, to which I that would be very difficult to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, I suppose pastoring or shepherding is precisely having to take people who are straying off in all sorts of directions and help them come together and walk together.
Yeah, I think you kind of have two streams of pastors. You have one who's more activist-oriented and looking to be an activist, and the other is looking to be, I think, maybe a more maintainer of the structures.
Yeah.
And what I have found is that most of us don't really understand, like, what it means to disciple. And we don't understand the Great Commission. And so there's a lot of confusion about what it actually means to be church. Yeah. Even though we have all this great, rich theology about how we're to be together, when we get together, it gets very messy, and we get really disappointed.
Yeah.
And we get frustrated with the minutia. The machine moves really slow sometimes, or the people are just frustrating. There's a lot of issues that you have to face, and so I think there's a lot of burnout. So I think that's a big part of why people are leaving, is that they can't handle it anymore, and it's not a high-paying job. So you have that pressure on there too, and then people don't necessarily like you in the general population. Pastors are not popular.
Yeah, there was I was reading I've been reading a book on the clergy and in kind of English history, essentially. And there was, a time when, to be a clergy member meant you had all this respect. And so I suppose you would you would get in there and people didn't listen to you, but just in general, you walked around the streets and you were a respected person. Well,
Yes.
not anymore.
No.
Not even close. And so it's like, to be a pastor is essentially to sign up for a fairly low-paying job, unless you're one of these mega-church guys, but that's not the norm. But a fairly low-paying job where, in general, people think you're kind of off. And, in the culture, and you get... And when you tell people you're a pastor, you're going to get treated different. And then your job is to kind of like engage spiritually with people and ask them to go places they don't want to go spiritually, emotionally, and people don't love that all the time either. Sometimes they receive it, but I feel like if we pitched it that way to seminarians, that'd be really good. Like, hey guys, here's what you're signing up for. You're going to ask people to do what they don't want to do, and they're not going to pay you a lot, and generally people aren't going to respect you for it. You want to do it?
Right. Oh, man. But I'd be interested in just maybe thinking a little bit through and talking about like why millennials are leaving, or if they really are leaving, because your church and my church are populated by millennials and Gen Xers. Not a lot of boomers, not a lot of older people. No. We have a few, but we're mostly young.
Right.
Why are young people coming to our churches?
Yeah.
Not in droves, let's say, but why are they there?
Yeah.
And why do we think they're leaving other communities or sticking to other communities?
Yeah, and I should say one quick note is I think a thing I hear all the time from our millennials especially is that they want older people at church. But there's an interesting, they don't like the churches where older people go.
Right.
But they really wish older people came to our church and were in their lives and investing in their lives. So that's an interesting piece, and that's a whole other podcast, I'm sure. But it seems, I think the thing I've noticed, I mean, and this is a discussion you and I have had, and some other pastors and I have had, is it seems that the millennials we're engaging with who are intrigued by faith or interested in faith or just completely devoted to faith they're moving around churches. They don't have that sense of needing to put down roots and invest and think long game with the community. I mean, and that's been one of the things that's, I suppose, frustrated me along the journey is having younger people come up and say, hey, like, I really, I think the church would be great if it were like this. And then, 2 weeks later, they're gone. And I think, well, how churches get to be like that, like what you described, is people invested for years, investing and walking with others. And then you get this rich thing that maybe you've seen at another church or something. But I can't just show up on a Sunday and wave my magic Bible and poof, there it is. I need all of the church to help create that. So sorry, I just got really frustrated now. But that's something I've noticed is always just drifting, looking for something or being a part of a number of things. And I'm not, I guess, sold on that being an awful thing to like maybe show up at multiple churches and bump into people at different communities. There's a beautiful thing to that too. But it seems that there should be, it would be better to have a place where you're deeply known and discipled and walked with regularly. And that, I think, is the missing piece for a lot of those folks. But what do you see?
Yeah, my brain is kind of racing when you were talking about all those things. I think you're right that there is a huge transitory kind of experience for younger people, and that they have, there's a fear that they're going to miss out.
Yeah.
That if you commit to one thing, you're going to miss out on another.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that anytime the relational issues come, or there are political or social political issues that they disagree with, or there's conflict, then they move away. And the other thing is, I think discipleship means you have to actually begin to be transformed. You have to take up your cross. Right. It's actually not just it's not just the clergy or the pastors who, hey, you're going to not be paid much and it's going to be a difficult road. That's actually the story for all of us.
Yeah.
The promise,
going to be a difficult road. Yeah.
Right, is to learn joy.
Yeah.
To find the joy of Christ in the midst of all of the struggle and dirtiness of the world. We didn't come to a fun world. The other thing that I was thinking about is that now I feel like I'm competing. I'm competing with Matt Chandler. I'm competing with Mark Driscoll. I'm competing, with Furyk or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
I'm competing with all these big people who have more than 5 hours to work on their sermon, have assistants who do all their research for them.
Which is just mind-boggling to me, to write a sermon that someone else researched.
Right. I mean, I remember listening to Mark Driscoll talk about how he had 3 assistants who did research for his sermons for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was mind-boggling. If somebody do my word studies for me, that'd be awesome.
Oh, yeah. Imagine how great...
well, maybe, I don't know.
we still deliver them, so there's that.
There is a delivering part, yes.
Yeah, right. No, and it's true, and unfortunately, like, we draw our own comparisons there, and then sometimes other people do too.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And that's hard, So hey, people out there, if you go to church, be really careful the comparisons you draw and ask your pastor to be who God's called him to be, not who God's called someone else to be. Just because, for goodness sakes, think about if it were you. If somebody were calling you to be like their favorite person in the world in your field or whatever, instead of who God had made you to be, and how crushing that would be. So there you go, a little application for you. But when I guess to the millennials that are in our church, I was thinking, why do we have? I think a couple of ingredients that we hear. We have younger people in leadership, so they see people like them up front, and we empower younger people to act and lead. And I think that's what I saw in Mark Dever. Here's an older guy empowering younger people. And so his church isn't like the super cool church. That you see the same thing in people like Tim Keller. It's not the super cool church. But they're raising up leaders and giving people, handing them the ball and saying, "We trust you. Go forward. We'll train you. We trust you." That kind of stuff. And I think that happens. We're learning how to do that at our church. And then there's a high level of authenticity. We've talked about that before here on this podcast, that I think the younger generation is longing for and connecting with. And there tends to be especially in cultural Christianity, and then, in the churches of the past, there seemed to be a hesitancy to be honest about what's going on, to talk about what you should be, but not talk about what is. And I think that, because we're pretty just open with it, that we connect with folks who feel the need to have that authenticity. So we, I suppose we've got interesting music and, espresso drinks or whatever, but I actually think it has very little to do with that. I think that stuff kind of comes out of the people that are, because we have espresso because we have 5 baristas at the church and people like espresso, so we make it. But I don't think that's why the millennials are there. I think we could have all those things. And that's the trouble. I've seen churches that go, "Oh, we need to get younger people. We should have cool music or coffee."
Right.
That's not that might be what you do because younger people are there, because that's what they do. But I don't think that's how you connect or relate. That seems gimmicky.
Right.
That's what I've realized. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been to churches where they have cool kids come to church.
Yeah.
They're like, let's invest in the cool kids because they'll bring more people.
Right.
And then you find the outcast being left out. And then you realize in some ways we're all outcasts.
Oh, yeah.
And we need people to reach it. I think that being cool or trying to be cool brings people in initially, but doesn't keep them there.
Yeah.
Because there can be a lack of authenticity there.
Yeah.
Because you're not really being like, hey, who are you? What makes you unique and special? And how can we love on you in a way that Jesus would?
Yeah.
And Jesus loved the outcast.
Yeah.
And he loves the cool kids too.
Yeah.
But
and the cool kids are struggling with the same stuff, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, but I've noticed something that's kind of an undercurrent at our church. But I feel like we could almost have a tagline at our church that said, like, I mean, this is to the world and to other churches, like, send us your B level, send us your bench players, send us your outcasts, and we're gonna put them to use and love them. Because I've just noticed that and I don't mean B level in reality, but the ones you think are B level, like, because I've noticed that we've had people come around who they were too young, or they dressed too weird, or they had tattoos, or they screwed up once, and they just couldn't ever. Nobody would let them, like, be a part. You know, you had to have the squeaky clean record and look really great and be really fun and influential, and then you can be a part of these ministries. And we've decided that's not what we're going to do. You know, and so I feel like I think that some people have found a home because they've come and said, "Hey, I blew it, I screwed up, but I really want to walk with Jesus," and we've said, "Okay." So
yeah, too.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
It's like the whole church. So welcome aboard.
Yeah, definitely.
And so Eric, more the millennials that have connected at the Village.
Well, I mean, I was just, as I listened to you, I think it's very similar reasons.
Yeah.
I think the authenticity. I think that everything that you see in our community comes out of the community itself. We didn't try to invent something to get people to come. It was just as people were gathering, this is what came out of them in a very authentic way. Yeah, we did say, hey, we value creativity, we value community. We put those values out in front of people and said, this is what we're striving for, this is what Jesus is talking about when he talks about, making disciples, being a disciple. It's committed to these kinds of things. But I think a big part of it is, like you said, empowering people to do ministry, empowering people to, be part of things. And then the leaders are all young. And like in our church, I mean, I'm the head pastor, quote unquote. Right. I'm the one who's paid full time. I preach 30 times a year. Yeah. I give up most of, the rest of those slots to either my co-pastor or to our leaders. So our leaders preach about 12 times a year. So you see, 22-year-old guys standing up and preaching, and people, all of a sudden those guys, people want to talk to them, want to engage them, and that produces an arena for teaching, and then they get to see them do it more and more and to disciple. And so I think that has a big impact too. It's just, you'll see a lot of young people in the different areas of leadership.
And what I've seen at your church that I love, and people that I know, people that go to your church, there's just this incredible intimacy that's so much like a family, and there's just this freedom to. I think that millennials and everybody alike desires intimacy, but it's so difficult to reach that point. It's so uncomfortable to get to that point where, like, you could share those deep stuff that's really bothering you and that you're struggling with and you're concerned about. And there's so much freedom there to be there and talk about it, and they're just right there with you to share their own stuff and also walk through that with you as well. And I think that's what also will help and has helped keep those millennials and just other people at the church too.
An incredible thing about the Village, Eric's church, is that there are some older folks, and so when he said my co-pastor, I mean this is a co-pastor's in his 665. And so you guys are platforming an older person. That's something that we don't have that I wish we had. But so when you, I think there's part of, like, you guys have a little more investment from some older folks. And I would venture to say it's because the same is true for them. There's a leader that looks like them, and they're valued. That's another piece I wanted to talk about is, I mean, this isn't just millennials leaving the church and maybe pastors. A big trend I've seen is, and I see it in my own parents, like, hi, Mom and Dad, I love you. We've had this discussion, so I feel free to talk about it. Sure. But my own parents, they don't go to church anymore. They they're going to church in their living room because there's so many church services on TV, and there are various reasons for them. They moved away from one church. Our church is at night. The fans are cold. There's a whole list, but they've just started going to church at home alone. And they're not alone. I've heard this a lot. I hear and see it a lot with older folks leaving the church for other reasons. But Eric, your church is, not that you've solved it, but you have retained older folks. We have a couple, and we're looking for more, by the way. Shameless plug, Mission Church. We meet at 4:30 p.m. on Sundays. We're looking for...
You can sleep in, man.
Yeah, you can, older folks, you could sleep in, bring us your elderly, but to have people who wanted to mentor and invest, who were older and had years, would be such a gift to us. We would love that. And I realize that wouldn't be the easy road, because you got a bunch of young people who think weird things, and our music's different than everything you're used to, but they want to follow Jesus, and they want the insight of older folks, and so everybody'd have to lay down something for that to work. But is that...
Well, and I think about that. One of the things I realize when I go to even like your church or to other churches, one of the reasons that we have been able to hold on maybe to a few older people is partly just the same reason of authenticity and all of that. But we've actually chosen, though we write our own music, and yes, it's kind of rocky, it's actually not very loud.
Yeah.
So we turn it down because it's hard for older people. As you get older, your ears. So we were like, okay, we're going to honor that. We're still going to play our kind of music, which is all in minor keys and all that kind of stuff. But it's going to... Yeah. We say, okay, we're not going to sing a lot of older songs, but you know what? We'll sing a cappella hymns because we know that that's a big part of your culture. Yeah. So we honor that. Music is huge and honoring without like saying, okay, we're just going to roll over. So that's been a big part. The other part is the pastors really emphasizing to older people, like, this isn't a church for you. We're asking you to come be part. It's a mission and a calling, and we want you to step in, and we understand that it's going to be hard, and we understand that you're not going to get to be fed the way you think you want to be fed. You'll soon learn that word is not a good word to use, and it really doesn't apply.
Right.
And you will be cared for and shepherded, but as you care for and shepherd. And I think, again, people who are older are all boomers. Yeah. So they went to churches, if they became Christians or grew up in Christian homes, where they were served all the time and not given a lot of places to serve other than, go do the nursery. If we haven't hired nursery workers. Yeah. So everything was service oriented, and so they're not used to saying, okay, you need to sit with this person and just listen. They've never done that, and no one's done that for them. Right. So some of it's training older people, giving them a vision, telling them that they can have an impact.
And discipling them into that. Yeah. And that's hard. I mean, I can imagine as an older person, to have this 30-some-year-old or 40-some-year-old pastor come along and say, hey, I want to train you to disciple. I'm going, what?
Right.
I've been going to church for 50 years. Right. But you know what? Like, it was kind of a missing ingredient. It wasn't offered like it should have been. Yeah. That's a huge piece, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we preached on Proverbs, I said, if you're older, you are wise, and here's why you're wise, because you know what's stupid.
Yeah.
You may not have
we did
all
it all
these
right.
brilliant all the ideas, but you know what not to do because you did what not to do, and you know what happened. And you can tell people, that's not a good idea. I know what's going to happen when you do that.
So we have, there's these three categories of people who are leaving, right? We've got... We started with pastors. Pastors are leaving. We started with young millennials. They're leaving. Older people are leaving. I'm sure people in the middle are leaving. And so that's a thing. But then the other piece that you mentioned, maybe to conclude here, is that, and I guess I alluded to it in the articles, people are talking about religion more than ever. There's a spiritual thirst. Some of the new philosophical work is saying that we're going into an age where people are looking for, trying to take religion out of everything hasn't answered the questions, and it hasn't worked. And even philosophers are realizing we can't operate this way. And people are longing for this. And then you were saying, like, not only are they longing for this, like, there seems to be some evidence out there that there are people saying that I would like to go to church. And what had you read? Or
Well, I had just heard somebody who is a quote-unquote expert on evangelism, which is a very insidey church kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just saying that looking at the different surveys and things they've done recently with millennials is that they not only want to talk about faith, but they would go to church with you if you asked them to go to church with you.
Right.
But
they're not going to walk in on their own, right?
No.
Probably not. Yeah.
No. I think they need permission of some sort.
Yeah.
So they need to be invited.
Yeah. So if there's any truth, and I feel like I've experienced that and even dropped the ball on that, because I, as a pastor, feel weird. I feel weird, like saying, "Hey, do you want to come to my church?" Or
and hear me preach?
Right, like that.
I was going to ask that earlier too. I was like, "What? How is that different?" Because if I ever pastor a church, I don't think I ever will. But to invite, like, "Oh, hey, I'm talking about how you're messed up and I messed up, and that's okay," and then to expect them to like go and hope for them to come, that's very difficult. I wouldn't be able to imagine how that is.
It is, and even right now I'm trying to wrap my mind around why it is. I think part of it is a fear that they're going to say no because we're pastors and we're normal and we don't like to be rejected and have somebody go, "No, I don't want to come to your weird thing."
Right. And hear you preach
and hear you
more,
talk. Yeah,
the more rejection.
Just invite each other like to the other person's church.
Yeah, we could practice. Hey, Eric, would you like to come to church with me sometime? Yeah.
Sure. What time?
Yeah. 30 minutes before yours. Does that work?
Shoot.
But yeah, like there's that, and then I think just this assumption, because if somebody's not going to church, you figure it's because they are actively like rejecting and saying, "I don't want to be a part of that." Which even as I say that, I go, "Well, that's probably not the case." I mean, right now, like it's never been so prevalent in the United States for somebody who have grown up never going to church or never hearing the gospel, and so chances are that the people we're talking to, though they're aware of religion, especially via the news and all the negative junk that goes on, they're aware of religion in that way, but they may have actually never heard the gospel articulated. They may never have really heard the central message. They may never have been a part of a Christian community. And I think a lot of studies show that people, you tend to do, I think this is just a fact. I'd have to look up I've heard this a number of times. You tend to do what the group you're surrounded by does. And so that should be instructive for us all. As Christians, people who aren't Christians aren't stupid. Like, just because they don't believe this. The reason we believe it is because we're in a community that believes it, and that encourages us to believe it.
Right.
But the same is true if you're not a Christian or religious at all, and you're listening to this and you're going, all those religious quacks. Oh, no, they're not. Because if actually, you might be really surprised if you were to enter into a Christian or religious community, be surrounded by these folks and start to understand what they value and see what they see, you might believe it more than you think. And so there's that's just a huge piece of the puzzle, and people are longing to belong. They're longing for things that ring true in their souls. They're longing for, I would say, mercy and grace. And so, maybe I shouldn't be so hesitant to say, "Hey, you want to come to church with me?"
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's faith over breakfast with Pastor Andy Bryan and Eric Seepin. That was amazing. Nice ending sermon there.
Oh, sure. Didn't even really. Oh, look at me! I'm preaching.
You're good at it. What do you know?
Hey, thanks, Brian.
Of course. Thank you both. Did you have any closing song?
No, that was my closing. A song? Did you say song? Closing
no.
song?
Let's close with an a cappella hymn. Actually, nobody wants that from us.
Oh, sorry.
No, he's good.
Brian.
I do know how to sing, but we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
This is not my podcast. I'm just the host. And I'm with Pastor Andy Littleton and Pastor Eric Seepin. Thank you both for joining me over faith and over breakfast. And faith over breakfast.
Our pleasure.
Thanks.